All right, am I up? Yes, all right. Thank you, Murat Bey and Murat Bey, for having me join you today. And I had the pleasure of Monsieur Senor Rey at the Steel Platts Conference in Barcelona, I think not that long ago, so it's a popular topic. I am here to talk about U.S. trade, and if I really got into it with you, we'd be here all day long because of the number of things going on in the United States, for better or for worse. We're in the thick of it right now, and we haven't seen this much activity since the 201 cases back in 2001, 2002, or prior to that, the Reagan administration, for those who go back far enough to the mid-1980s, where steel was and is the topic of conversation. Of course, that's now being surpassed to some extent by the fact that we have 232 on steel, we have 232 on automotive and automotive parts, we have Section 301 and tariffs going on China. We have NAFTA renegotiation 2.0 going on, and we have something that is coming up on the horizon called the Fair and Reciprocal Trade Act, codenamed FART in the United States, which the President is going to propose, which would obviate our obligations under the World Trade Organization agreement. I'm not sure how far that one's going to go, but we'll see how far the FART passes. So, to get started, let's see if I can do this right. Here we go. Here we go. All right, so America First trade policy. You've seen this slide before, who've seen me talk. When the President first came into office, the first thing that came out of the administration and the U.S. Trade Representative's office was this picture. America First. America, United States, under the Trump administration has taken a zero-sum trade policy approach. We win, you lose. Growth in trade is not the mantra. Increasing U.S. trade is the mantra. For better or for worse, our president believes that the pie is not going to get larger and that the U.S. needs to take a larger piece of the static pie that exists. Obviously, we believe that is an incorrect statement, but that's the way we're going right now. And this is the key to what's going on these days in the U.S. Steel and aluminum tariffs under 232. We have the pending Section 232 case on automobiles and automotive parts. And if you think steel is going to cause a ruckus, you wait till the auto case comes to fruition and they actually impose duties on automotive and automotive parts. GM, Chrysler, and Ford are all against this. So you ask yourself, why are we doing it in the United States? Because the president believes this is his way to get negotiating leverage over our trading parties. And of course, we have the 301 case on China. And just to give you a sense of just how quickly this is moving, the front page news from the paper in Washington yesterday was Trump has decided to impose $200 billion on Chinese goods. The 10% tariffs will go into effect. He's going to formally announce them this next week, and we can expect them sometime within the next 2 weeks going into effect. More fun. Keeps me busy. Here are the cast of characters that we're dealing with in the United States. Obviously, everybody recognizes President Trump. Next to him is Secretary Mnuchin from the Treasury Department, who has a passing fancy in trade. He's the one who they keep countermanding when he says, we're not going to fight with our trade partners. But then the rest of them say, we are going to fight with our trade partners. Then you have Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce. Mr. Ross is an avowed protectionist. His company, International Steel Group, he made his money buying bankrupt steel companies, rehabilitating them. And of course, he has no interest in what's going on in the U.S. steel industry as a result. Next to him, Mr. Lighthizer. Mr. Lighthizer is a well-known trade lawyer. He's one of my colleagues in the bar. He's a good lawyer. He's a smart lawyer. He was the architect of the Reagan administration voluntary restraint agreements in the mid-1980s, so you kind of know where he's coming from. And he worked for years and years representing U.S. steel companies at a major U.S. law firm. It's not surprising that they put most of their people in lower positions in the government are all protectionist U.S. steel type people. And of course, then you have Mr. Navarro at the end, who, from all accounts, got hired by the Trump administration because Jared Kushner, when they were looking for a trade advisor, Googled China and trade, and his name came up because he wrote the book Death by China. So now we have one of the leading architects of U.S. trade policy based on a Google search. Not sure how well that's going to work out, but he has the ear of the president, and he is indeed driving a lot of the stuff that's going on that we're seeing these days. So we'll start with 232 because that's really the name of the game right now for steel and where you all are sitting. Obviously, the 232 focuses on national security. It was last used in 2002 by President Bush, and it had a short lifespan. So it's not very well used, and it's not very well understood as a result. Most people didn't think that this was ever going to come up again in a steel context. But of course, the president found he could do it for the simple reason that the text, Section 232 statute provides the maximum amount of discretion to the president in how to conduct and what to impose in terms of retaliatory duties or protectionist duties. It gives him a lot of room to maneuver. All the other statutes have more rules of the road, more requirements, more procedure, more intervention by other parties. This is all up to the president. Yes, he gets a report from the Commerce Department, but once he gets the report, he can ignore it. He can do whatever he wants, pretty much. Not completely. Factors to consider: national defense requirements, capacity of the domestic industry, the need for raw materials, requirements for growth. National defense, of course, he has to consult with the Defense Department. The Defense Department says, we don't have a problem. We don't need any support. There's no national security issue from our standpoint. You look at capacity of domestic industries. Yes, the domestic industries have capacity, and yes, they want to use that capacity, and they would like to get above 82% capacity utilization. Of course, that begs a question that what's going on now are the U.S. mills are taking a lot of mills out of mothballs and putting them back into service, some of which are antiquated mills and probably shouldn't be put back into service anyway. But what does that mean for our capacity utilization rates? It's not a static number, right? They're going to change the capacity numbers because they're going to bring more mills back in that shouldn't be, and that ends up lowering the rate in which the capacity utilization rates increase to some extent. What is impacted? Everyone who manufactures or exports or imports into the U.S. of a covered product is obviously affected by this. There's no one more so than Turkey right now. Turkey is essentially out of the U.S. market because of the 50% tariffs that got put in place on Turkey relative to the rest of the world, which has got 25% tariffs on it, with a few exceptions, obviously, for Korea, Brazil, those who agreed to these quotas. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So here's a quick history tour. I'm not going to dwell on this very long. The March 8th was the first presidential proclamation where they imposed a 25% tariff. By the way, I have never seen so many presidential proclamations issued in trade in the 30-plus years of my career. Every other week, he's issuing a proclamation on trade. It's very unusual to see that. But of course, this is our president, and this is what he's into doing these days. The tariffs took effect initially on March 23rd with some exceptions, and they issued some procedures for requesting exclusions, which have created a lot of chaos for those of you who have tried to get exclusions granted or have requested them. You know what I'm talking about, and we just had a new set of regulations issued last week where they're changing the rules again on how you apply for an exclusion and how you can rebut somebody objecting to your exclusion. And in fact, I spent most of my Friday on the phone with people talking about how rebuttals should be posted into the Commerce Department websites. The first exclusion were granted or denied on June 20th. And that process is ongoing as we talk. And of course, here is the famous tweet from the Donald Trump administration. I have just authorized the doubling of tariffs on steel and aluminum with respect to Turkey as their currency. The Turkish lira slides rapidly downward against a very strong dollar, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, that is all what we would call a trumped-up charge on Turkey because, yes, the lira has been depreciating quite rapidly, but of course, there are other factors at work causing that to happen, and the 232 50% has just caused it to accelerate. So it's unfortunate that Turkey's been singled out the way it is. I would argue that it's actually illegal that Turkey's been singled out the way it is? Because the function of 232, which is a national security protection, means the president has to have some grounding in national security for his decision. And he may have a lot of latitude and a lot of discretion within which to operate, but there are at least some rules that he's supposed to follow. And the basic rule is, what is the national security purpose being served here? Maintaining steel capacity. And is what he's projecting to do going to solve or help ameliorate that threat? Turkish imports were already down 59% before the 50% tariffs took place in 2018. If you took all of Turkish imports off the table, I mean zero, you could not get to the 80% plus capacity utilization numbers that he's projected. The only way you get there is to put Canada, Mexico, Russia, India, and others on the list for higher tariffs. He hasn't done that. So the question is, has what he done exceeded his authority under the statute? That's an open question. What are the retaliatory actions as a result? Obviously, we've seen behavior from the U.S. or from our trading partners that was swift and quite dramatic. Mexico, I think, came first. Then Canada, EU, Turkey, China, and India have all put retaliatory tariffs in place. And the reason that they've done this is that they say that this isn't really a national security issue. This is the equivalent of a disguised safeguard. And under the WTO rules, if somebody puts a safeguard in place, you are allowed to impose compensatory tariffs on other products to compensate for the harm you're suffering as a result of those safeguards. The U.S. says, no, it's all national security based, and we're allowed to under the national security exception under the GATT, which is true. But the U.S. of all countries has historically been the most strident guardian of not allowing anybody to use a national security exception in the GATT until now. Because they realized, up until now, that when you open that Pandora's box, everybody is going to start claiming a national security exception for just about anything they can think of that they want to protect. And so it's a very dangerous weapon to use and should not be used unless in extreme emergency. And that's the problem for us. So here's a quick look at the retaliatory actions that have taken place. You can see the amount of trade that folks have targeted with the retaliatory actions. Curiously, Russia and Japan, so far as I can remember, have not put anything in effect yet, although they've made some noise. The largest numbers are coming from Canada, not surprisingly, and Mexico. They're our closest trading partners and have the most amount at stake. I think there's a possibility that they might get resolved with the NAFTA 2.0 negotiations coming up. We don't know for sure, but those are pretty far advanced, and I can talk a little bit about that later if there's time. Here is the exclusion bandwagon, I call it. There are still exclusion requests pending. You'll take a look at the number of requests that have come in. 28,000 as of the end of last month. And they've had, and granted or denied, in the order of, 25, 35, 4,000 of them so far. They've only gone through May in terms of the number of exclusions that they've had a chance to look at out of the 28,000. So there's a whole lot of exclusions pending. And of course, we've changed the system again last week. They issued new regulations, interim rules, that allow parties to, if you have an exclusion request pending and somebody objects to it, like U.S. Steel or Nucor comes in and says, we can make the product, you're allowed to file a rebuttal now, a formal rebuttal, which means no, what they're telling you is not true. And you're going to start seeing some of those. And they've also clarified some of the rules in effect for how rebuttals work. One of which is, when a U.S. mill says it can make a product, it's supposed to be delivered to you within 8 weeks. If they can't make an 8-week schedule, it is not immediately available, and that's grounds for an exclusion. Okay? Now, that raises some other issues. For example, some companies have longer-term time horizons they have to deal with. And it's not so easy to project out what your needs are going to be, or whether a company can meet the delivery time. Interesting factoid just came out of the New York Times. They have successfully objected to hundreds of requests, which is Nucor and U.S. Steel. And the bottom is the most important one. To date, their efforts have never failed. When they object, so far, no one's been granted an exclusion. I think that will change now because there are a couple of pretty strong cases coming in that I'm working on where it would make sense to grant the exclusion, but up to now, they've been very effective at controlling it. Of course, they asked me about what the impact is on the markets. Obviously, one impact is on price. You look at the change in steel and, of course, aluminum prices after the tariffs got announced. It's not surprising you all can see this every day on the trading activity that's going on. Prices have gone up in the U.S., which is why they're opening up all these old mills, because all of a sudden their economics work, right? My problem with that has always been, in some ways, I would be okay with the U.S. providing some level of support to their U.S. industry, but the way they're doing this is the wrong way, because they're not encouraging new investment in high-grade, high-speed mills. They're not encouraging investment in HBI production facilities, which is the newest form of producing steel, much more efficient, not taking advantage of our natural advantages with natural gas and energy resources properly, all the things that you think you'd want to be doing to modernize the steel industry. We are not doing it right now. What we are doing is supporting the old industry still. To me, that does not get to the root of the problem in the U.S. if you want a modern and profitable steel industry. Repercussions, obviously, economic tariffs result in an increase in U.S. steel employment. We may get 26,000 jobs out of it, but the cost is estimated at over 400,000 jobs in the U.S. Why? Because there's a whole lot more people that use steel and make products from steel, intermediate products in the United States than use raw steel that's produced by Nucor and U.S. Steel. And those jobs are in jeopardy. There are lots of examples of that, and a couple that I'm very familiar with on the energy side. Plains All-American Pipeline. They're building a 500-mile pipeline. They bought Greek-made pipe. Why? Because they wanted a straight weld, 26-inch, 80-foot segments of pipe because of safety and reliability needs. There is not a U.S. mill that makes that particular product. There's only 2 mills in the world that actually make it. One's in Japan and one's in Greece. They chose the Greeks. They put this project in place long before the 232 tariffs came in place. This is a pipeline project. You're ordering this stuff a year in advance, right? And so now they're being faced with the necessity of paying the extra duties, which kills their ROI on the project, because they still have to use the same steel pipe for this Cactus pipeline. And they're actually one of the parties that is up for a rebuttal on exclusion because the U.S. mills said they can make the product. The problem is they can't make the product quickly. And they can't make an identical product. They can make a spiral weld. And a spiral weld is very different than a straight weld 26-inch pipe. Second one, nail manufacturers. This is pretty emblematic of the type of downstream industries that are getting hit by this. Mid-Continent Steel and Wire could go out of business because they can't buy the steel wire rod they need to make the nails anymore. It's too expensive relative to other markets. And what you're seeing is in industry after industry where steel is a big piece of it, that same problem is playing itself out. In the U.S. energy industry in particular, you're seeing more and more concern. Right now, we have plenty of pipe on the ground in the United States for drilling and other energy activities, but we're going to start to run short. Those inventories are going to start to run out, and when that happens, there will be a problem because there isn't enough material to replace it, and if the material coming in is much more expensive, it affects your drilling programs and your production. So we may see a slowdown in U.S. activity in that field. Political repercussions. There are increasing concerns in Congress and outside in the United States. Whenever these types of things get put in place, I call it the pressure cooker effect. You put the measures in place, and there's an initial hue and cry that this is unfair, it's unfair, but everybody says fine. And then you put the lid on the pressure cooker and you seal it, and it starts heating up. And as it heats up, more and more people feel the effects of these tariffs, and it gets worse and worse and worse over time. And during the 2001 201 tariffs, the pressure cooker took 18 months to blow. In the Reagan administration, I think it was a couple of years before they blew the top off it. So we're looking at a period of time in which these 232 tariffs will be in place. And the question is, how quickly do they ramp up the pressure in the pressure cooker? And you'll see the most interesting thing I saw last week is that the amount of lobbying activity has gone up threefold, and they've started a new Tariffs Hurt the Heartland campaign in order to combat this. And more and more and more industries are joining this, not because of steel, but because of the tariffs on China with 301 and the auto parts. That's where the real money is going to be coming in that people are going to have to fight about. Of course, there are legal cases. The American Institute for International Steel has filed a constitutional challenge to 232. That case is ongoing. The Justice Department just filed their reply brief in opposition on Friday, which I read on the plane coming over here. The issue there is whether the 232 statute itself is unconstitutional. Under the Constitution, the Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes and regulate foreign commerce. It's in the Constitution, written exactly that way. The Congress can delegate authority to the President to take care of these things for it, but it can't absolve itself of the responsibility under the Constitution for managing that function. And the issue in this case is, did the Congress, when it did 232, simply just abdicate responsibility for foreign trade and commerce and giving the President complete and unbridled authority to act? That's an open question that's going to be pursued in this and other cases that we'll see coming up. And of course, the WTO, there's the cases being filed treating this as a safeguard actions. Mexico, Canada, EU, Turkey, and China have all filed WTO cases, and more parties are joining every week. We're seeing more activity there. A quick word on auto parts. This is the latest new thing coming up. On May, the Department of Commerce initiated the 232 investigation. It's still pending right now. We're not sure where it's going to go, but we're pretty sure that there will be tariffs put in place. And as I said, that changes the dynamic in the U.S. quite a bit, because whereas steel is a relatively small part of the U.S. economy, autos and auto parts is a lot bigger and has a much more direct impact. How much does it cost to buy a car? How much does it cost to bring generators, alternators, brake pads, all the things that go into making a car into the United States? And there is no such thing as a U.S.-made automobile. If you buy a car in the U.S., it's got stuff, the engine may come from Mexico, some parts of the cab will come in from Canada, some parts will be made in the U.S., and through all that, there'll be minor parts coming in from China, Japan, you name the country, there are pieces coming in. The logistics supply chain is completely internationalized, and this 232 will cause a massive disruption, which is going to generate a lot more lobbying activity to try to combat it. Section 301, this is the new kid on the block, or maybe not so new. We've already gone through a couple of rounds with the Chinese. The first one list, they put on $50 billion. That mostly hit some industrial products, things that didn't really have a direct impact on the United States or the larger part of the U.S. economy, industrial equipment sector. The tariffs that just got announced or are going to be announced this week go much broader. The second list, the third list, which is the $200 billion list, that includes refrigerators, television sets, air conditioners, toys, consumer products, Walmart, Target. Think of consumer-based products. Going to Best Buy and buy your television set. That Dynex is now going to cost more, right? So this is where, again, the tariffs are going to start hitting mainstream economy, and that's where the opposition is going to start to grow, because people will feel the effects of it much more directly. Response from China, obviously they filed a WTO case on the 301 stuff. They'll be putting other tariffs in place. Probably the most meaningful tariffs to date has been on soybeans. The U.S. exports approximately 30% of its annual soybean crop to China. The Chinese, as a result of the first round of tariffs, slapped tariffs on soybeans. Soybean prices dropped something like 30% as a result of that. So the soybean farmers in the middle section of the U.S. are not happy. And that is playing itself out with other products like apples, corn, other staple products. The U.S. agricultural industry is very much hurt by this. And if you look at the farmers, they'll say in the short term, we'll take one for the team, right? We'll suck it up and deal with this. But that's going to run out. That patience will run out sooner rather than later. Because if you have a couple of years where your crop rates are down and you can't find a market for it and lose markets as a result of it, that's a problem. I always say, I was up in Maine this summer. I have a place up there, and I almost went to sea because the lobstermen were all upset. They were shipping 30% of the lobster production was going to China last year. Now there are no lobsters going to China. Of course, the Canadians are really happy about this because all of their lobsters are now going to China instead of U.S. lobsters. Risks. There was increased enforcement that's going to come out of 232 on the customs side. What happens when tariffs on products increase a lot? One, people will try to downgrade or change their valuation, lower the valuation of those products on the product coming in. Customs is going to watch for that. Two, country of origin. Well, the product is coming from Turkey, but it's going through Canada and it's being remanufactured into something else, so it's really Canadian origin. Really? Well, what did you do to it to cause it to become Canadian origin? Or classification. Is the product steel? Is it something else? What kind of steel? Right? So these things are going to come up, and we're going to see a lot of activity in those areas. Of course, I wouldn't want to finish talking about this without going into where we are with the trade litigation proceedings. I like this slide. I put it up and update it periodically. There are precious few products that haven't been subject to an anti-dumping and/or countervailing duty case, any major products in the last several years. I only put the larger sets of cases up here. If I tried to put them all up, it would be 30 or 40 different products with individual countries, especially coming out of China. But you can see almost everything that's been hit that we work on, cold-rolled, flat-rolled, hot-rolled, cut-to-length plate, rebar, wire rod, every imaginable form of long product tubing, whether it's rectangular, light-walled, heavy-walled, ASTM A53, API 5, new CTG, it's all been subject to dumping cases. And you would ask yourself, is there anything left? And I frequently ask myself that question because I do a lot of these cases. And the answer is, there's always another country that is going to fill the void. When you have a dumping case, it's like hitting a balloon. You push on the balloon, that country gets knocked out, but there's another producer and they start bringing it in. And therefore, we have more dumping cases. So for better or for worse, I have job security. NAFTA, just a quick word on that. Those negotiations are ongoing. There was a deal struck with Mexico. Trump argued or suggested that he was going to drop the Canadians from that. That's not likely to happen. There is going to be too much opposition in the Congress to him not including Canada in the deal. Based on what I heard on Thursday before I left, there is a pretty good shot there's going to be a deal with Canada, and the deal with Canada and Mexico is going to cover to some extent the 232 duties, but more importantly, the auto parts issue. And so they will be given some kind of special treatment if they come out with a 232 decision on autos and auto parts. But we do believe that there's going to be a NAFTA 2.0. And the question is, can they get the fine-tuning done in the next week or two? Because it sounds like they're very close to cutting a deal. Last word, generalized system of preferences. This is mostly because of what's going on with countries being taken off the list. The Trump administration is no fan of the GSP system. They've said that they don't like it very much and that they want to kind of trim it back. The most recent casualty is they put Turkey on the list of countries under review for GSP treatment. I think that's just a underhanded way of going back at Turkey again in a form of retaliation for the issues that we're having on a foreign policy level with Turkey these days. But I think it's pretty odd on favorite that they're probably going to push Turkey out because of this annual review. I don't see a good outcome on that one. And I think that's it for me. So I'll turn over to my colleague to take over.